Welcome to the Black Entrepreneur Experience podcast, inside the business, buzz, and brilliance of Black entrepreneurs. Here is your host, Dr. Frances Richards.
Innovative Thinkers episode number 444. Innovative Thinkers. Thank you for joining us as we elevate the Black entrepreneur experience by interviewing CEOs, thought leaders, innovative thinkers, and Black entrepreneurs across the globe. I'm your host, Dr. Frances Richards. Our next guest helps CEOs to drive innovation and disrupt the marketplace. Welcome, Ted Santos.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be here, and I look forward to a very dynamic conversation with you.
You're welcome. I've given our audience such a brief bio. Why don't you fill in the gaps and share with our audience what you'd like them to know about you and your business?
Sure. Well, if the elevator pitch, if I'm in the elevator going down or up, I'm going to tell that person, I am in the business of producing miracles. CEOs hire me when they are looking to create a breakthrough and they're not sure how to do it with existing resources. So one of the things I do is work with them to create disruptive strategies, and that could be disruptive technology or penetrating untapped markets. No matter what, it's going after revenue they had never gone after in the past. And then I work with them to transform corporate culture to ensure the organization is able to profitably execute that breakthrough initiative. So that's a nutshell of what I do.
Give us the backstory. How did you start?
That's a rather profound story and question. So what I noticed over time was that disruption, chaos, problems, breakdowns had a tendency to bring out the best in people. Now, some people may fall apart. I lived in Acapulco, Mexico for about 2 years. I was there during the worst hurricane in their history. And what I saw from the people was this resilience. I saw them working together, coming together. It looked like a war zone the day, 2 days after the event. And luckily, I lived in an area where I wasn't hard hit by the hurricane. We had storm, but there were entire villages washed out into the ocean. So it was a true disaster, but to watch people come together. Also, I live in New Jersey, and I live in a town overlooking the Hudson River right across from Manhattan. So I had a clear view of the entire New York skyline. And when 9/11 happened, that was another disaster, unfortunate circumstance. And I watched how New Yorkers, this whole area, the resilience, how people came together. And even more interesting, there were so many police cars from Wisconsin, from Connecticut, from Florida, from all over the country, police, fire, that came here to help. It's just amazing how sometimes unfortunate events brings people together and to do things that they don't normally do. So over time and from a child, I started seeing these patterns of how supposed misfortune could bring out the best in people. You hear about people running into burning buildings to save the child. There are all kinds of stories that you hear. So I thought, what if you could bring that into an organization and you use, not like a lot of corporations use something called a burning platform where you create this false alarm, like, oh, this is urgent, you have to do this. And if we don't get it done, and a lot of times the executives will withhold the project until 2 weeks and say, you only have 2 weeks to do it. And in interviews, employees resent that. But if you could create a methodology that could pull out of people what these chaotic situations like 9/11 and in Acapulco, the hurricane, you could bring extraordinary out of people. You could galvanize teams. You could actually have people do things they normally don't do without manipulation. It's through their own desire, their own commitment. So that's sort of the background on a surface level.
You've had the opportunity to sit at the table with many CEOs.
Yes.
Tell us a story that's so profound from the conversation at the table?
There are lots. So I'm thinking of a gentleman who he's a former CEO of a Fortune 500 bank, and then went on to be the chairman of a household name New York Stock Exchange. And he was telling me that he served in the military. So he was in Vietnam, West Point graduate. So talented, brilliant, smart guy. But in the military, as a leader, he learned to work with the people he was given. So when he now went to corporate America, he only knew how to work with the people he was given. He wasn't the best at finding the people he truly needed. He just worked with what he had. So when it came time for him to retire, a little over 10 years as CEO, he didn't know how to pull the best successor. So he gave the job to the most likely individual, which was the CFO. And 18 months, so the CEO I know retires, CFO takes over, which the CFO was the number two guy, and he was a great number two guy. He put in lots of years, and he failed at CEO because he was always a number two guy. He was never trained or coached up to be the number one guy. So 18 months into his tenure, the board had to remove him and now do a search for a new CEO. So it's a testament to no one's really entitled to a job just because they are there and they put in the time. If you're not going to train and coach people up for the position you're about to give them, then you need to search for someone who really is capable and competent for the job.
What is your zone of genius?
Probably understanding people as an executive. So now I'll tell you about my fortunate misfortunes, the real essence of understanding disruptive leadership. When I was 6 years old, I watched my mother run with broken legs. And it was only because she took us, I'm the oldest child. At the time, there were three. She, for New Year's Eve, went to her mother's house, big celebration. It's over. I don't know, maybe it's 4 or 5 in the morning. She drops her brother off and his wife in the next town and has her 3 children sitting in the front seat. Well, she figures we never drove in a front seat. Normally we were in the back, but we were asleep. And she said, oh, it's 15 minutes, I'll go home. And bang, we wake up, the car is wrapped around a tree 100 yards from home. And I'm just tall enough to look over the dashboard, and I watched my mother run home. She didn't limp, she didn't crawl, she ran just like always. And later I learned she had 2 broken legs. So now I am fixated on human beings must have something that they don't know how to pull out of themselves. So I started at 9 years old. I started studying, researching human behavior. I started training at 11, push-ups, sit-ups, building a body to be an athlete. And I broke records as an athlete. And then there was a mindset of wanting to run with broken legs. So I never just trained to be good. I was training to pull that something out of me that allowed me to run with broken legs. At 21, now there are 4 children, and I get a phone call that both my parents have died. And now, as the oldest of 4, I take over the family. And there's still that running with broken legs. So my genius is understanding people, being able to pull out of people what they don't know how to get out of themselves. And the death of my parents was a very fertile ground for me to develop leadership, to really understand leadership in the face of chaos, how to coach people up around you. And in that case, I had to work with what I had. I had two sisters, 12 and 16, and a brother, 19. And my brother I had to drop him off. He had a football scholarship, so I had to take him to school. So I have 12 and 16-year-old sisters, and I'm delegating things to them. And I know they don't know how to do this stuff. So instead of telling them how to do it, I'd ask them to do it, knowing they would fail and being okay with that. And when they came back to fail, I asked questions. They went to try again. They failed again. So we kept doing that until they started understanding the questions in a problem solving process that they no longer had to come to me. I could ask them to do it and they would work it out without me. And then they started volunteering for things that they normally didn't do. So my mother running with broken legs, parents dying, researching human behavior gave me this genius when it comes to running companies of understanding people, knowing how to coach people up in the face of chaos, keeping a cool head. Those are all things that have given me a real edge advantage in running companies and being able to get companies to produce breakthrough performance.
Who is Ted Santos?
Who am I? So who I am is a leader's leader. So when I work with CEOs, I am working with the leader of the organization. And every leader has to go somewhere to a leader. So my job is to always stay far ahead of my clients in terms of understanding how to run businesses, understanding mindset, which has become a very profound part of the business world. Even the scientific community is seeing that mindset is so critical, especially when you want to create breakthroughs. And we live in an environment, a global environment that is filled with disruption from economics, pandemics, competition. So who I am is this huge commitment to leading leaders so that they become much more effective as leaders in creating much better organizations.
You talked about your ideal client is CEOs. Can you be more specific?
I like guys in the middle market. So middle market CEOs often, and that is 50 million to a billion in revenues. Middle market CEOs often have the same problems as a Fortune 500 company, except they do not have access to the same resources. So they have an enormous amount of complexity, and it really allows me to sort of show my goods to be able to work in organizations that have that level of complexity. And these are people who can't afford to pay a chief operating officer $500,000 to solve problems, and they can't throw $100 million to solve another problem. It requires a lot more creativity in running their organizations and being able to maintain really good people.
I know you've been doing this work for a minute. Tell us one of your profound success stories.
There's a company that makes food, consumable items. It's a family-owned business. Grandfather started the business in 1930, and it was just a retail. And then the grandfather's son-in-law took over the business and took it to its next level, which he went into the commercial retail stores. And now the grandsons are running the business. And when I started with them, they were doing about $25 million, and now they're doing well over $100 million. They, instead of having one location, they have 3 different plant manufacturing facilities. But one of the biggest part of their success is their grandfather and their father always sold items that were their own brand. What they had never done, and which was the breakthrough, and it was an untapped market, was to start producing products for other people under another company's brand. So you call it co-manufacturing or co-packing. And it opened up a whole world for them of revenues that grew top line and also increased the innovation within the organization in the things that they make.
Now, is co-packaging the same or similar to white labeling?
Yes, it can be. It's not actually the same. So white labeling means my client makes a product and you put that product under your brand. What I'm saying is you have your own product and my client has never made it ever. And you come to my client, and that means they may have to buy new equipment, new training, and they will now make your product and scale it to whatever size you have. So it is different from white labeling.
How do you make impact daily, Ted?
I train every day. So I train in mind and in body. So I'm in the gym at least 5 days a week. And in the gym, that is a huge commitment to my own health and my discipline. It helps me maintain a certain mindset. I do exercises. I engage in exercises in the terms of the mind. I study. I talk to people who help me stretch beyond what I normally think. So there's a mind and body training that I do on a daily basis to keep me operating beyond what business as usual.
There are so many brands and businesses that are dominating. Talk about a brand or a business that's dominating that you admire and why.
American Express. American Express influenced me a long time. So I was running a transportation company in the 90s, and I studied American Express, and I saw that they started in 1850 as a Pony Express company. And they were just running gold, or they take your money from New York to Boston. That was their route. And then they were going New York to Boston, Boston to DC, and then Boston to Atlanta. And then they started branching out to the West. And then one day their revenues dropped by like 50% or more, like almost overnight. And that's because the post office created a money order. And just like that, American Express was almost out of business. So what did they do? They created a money order. So that helped them sustain themselves. But then they started getting into travel agency and traveling. So you figure if you're doing a Pony Express, you don't, in the 1800s, you don't have airplanes. So if you're delivering money, you could actually put passengers in a stagecoach also. So they started doing travel. American Express did not do the credit card until 1959, and it didn't do so well in the beginning. So what I liked about American Express is that they were able to constantly transform themselves, to start as a Pony Express company to now become a premier credit card and financial institution. It's a huge leap in transformation, even though they always started dealing with money, moving money, and they're still moving money now, but it's still it's a great story. And so when I ran companies, I always had that in the back of my mind of what could make us obsolete tomorrow. So what are the other possibilities we need to be looking at that are beyond what we do today?
That is a great story. I want you to have a monologue. I want you to name this person, living or not. They've inspired you so much. Who is that person, and what are you saying to that person?
You probably won't like my answer. That's me. So I told you the story of seeing my mother run with broken legs. So what I was after had nothing to do with a specific person. I was after what was possible in a human being. So I was always training and thinking beyond that. One of the consequences of thinking that way is you always sound very odd and different to everyone else.
That's very profound. What problem exists in the world today, Ted, that you would like to solve?
Divorce.
Why?
Corporate America is losing $300 billion every year in workplace productivity because of divorce. So that Life Innovations study, they brought out all the engineers and CPAs and finance people, and they worked out $300 billion. In addition, there's another 30 billion to you and I, the taxpayer, because divorce usually leads to children that could get into crime, the need for social services, damages from crime. There are all sorts of things that another $30 billion. So that's a lot of money, 300 billion to corporate America. And there's another study that finds when people are going through divorce, their workplace performance drops by 50 to 75%. So imagine you have a company, American Express has about 90,000 employees. Percentage of your employees are headed for divorce. They're just starting to become combative. Another percentage are in the middle, and another percentage just came out of it. So that's a lot of people who could be distracted, distraught, and less productive in the workplace. When you have a percentage of people who are unproductive in the workplace, that's going to negatively impact your profits. And so what do you do to get your profitability to where you want? You start laying people off. And you're not going to lay off the people who are dealing with divorce. You're going to randomly lay off anyone. And when people get laid off, that can cause problems in their marriage. And then you have the cycle of more divorces happening. So divorce is hurting us as a society. It's making us less productive in business. It's making us less productive in social, how we interact with one another. It increases crime. There are so many negative impacts of divorce, and we're sort of sweeping it under the rug as though it's not affecting anyone. Like, oh, it's just a divorce. So what? I say, this is me saying, when we think of corporate social responsibility, what we think of is corporations are going to save the environment. Great. I don't want to throw that away. But what I'm saying, what I'm asserting is that corporations could eliminate or put a huge dent in the divorce rate. One of the skills that most executives say they wish they were better at was conflict resolution. So if you could train people in the workplace and they develop skills and competencies that are transferable to the home life, they'll have better home life. Conflict resolution is just one that would benefit people in their marriages. So when I speak about transforming corporate culture, creating breakthroughs, quantum leaps, one of the things that is absolutely critical when you create breakthroughs is you have to be prepared that breakthroughs, for sure, they put you in this domain of uncertainty, the things of you don't know. If you're producing a breakthrough, it means there's no blueprint. So now you have to be prepared for the chaos. Now, how do you navigate yourself? And as a leader, how do you navigate yourself and your people through chaos? Most people are not good at that. However, if you had the mindset and the skills to be able to effectively navigate through chaos, when you go home, you will be much more effective in navigating any chaos that shows up at home with your spouse, with your children, with your neighbors. And that would significantly reduce the divorce rate, which would then reduce many other problems that we have in society. It would all be because corporate America took a stand and said, we're going to engage in corporate social responsibility, and we're going to train our people in such a way that they will have a better quality of life in and out of work. And we have training programs and these skills are completely transferable.
Ted, what is your biggest takeaway from our conversation today? What do you want the audience to leave with?
That if each of you lived for 1,000 years, you would still not be used up. There would still be more of you that you haven't gotten to. And it's not just in terms of knowledge. It's what's possible. If you looked at a human being as a possibility and what's possible, what can you accomplish? What can you get out of yourself, out of life? In 100 years, you're not even going to scratch the tip of the iceberg. So there's so much more that people have in them. And I think people too often, they undermine themselves in what's possible for them by presuppositions and limiting beliefs. And some of them, they don't even know are limiting beliefs. They think it's just reality. So I would really like people to get that there's some breakthrough waiting for them to discover.
And what is your possibility and breakthrough on the horizon for Ted?
Managing this divorce rate, having corporations participate in that. So one of the things that I did to start that is I wrote a book called Here's Why You Can't Find Love. And I took some aspects of my methodology I use in corporations and I incorporated it into a book about relationships. Relationships seems to be something most people can relate to. Most people have had an intimate relationship in their life. And so It's an interesting book because there are 5 women interviewing me. So it's almost like a workshop. And it starts out with, Ted, you're a guy, and that's a guy's perspective, and you can't do that. And, and so there's a little arm wrestling, and it's some little humor. What they're asking great questions. And I talk about how people sabotage relationships, and some of it is unknowing. Like sometimes what you think is your strength could actually end up being your weakness. It's sabotaging your life. And then I talk about how to create a great relationship in the book. So I wrote the book I've always been known as the guy who works with executives and board members. And so this is that possibility for me to touch the average person walking down the street.
And how can they purchase the book?
Oh, it's on Amazon. You can find it in Barnes & Noble if you see this book right here, Barnes & Noble's website. But yeah, or any electronic bookstore, you'll be able to find it.
Let's talk about an attitude of gratitude. And I want you to have a thank fest. Okay. I want you to thank people and situations that has influenced and impacted your life.
So I thank my father for the amount of problem solving. He would have my brother and I changing car engines and doing all kinds of things, but it really was great at problem solving. I thank his father, my grandfather. As soon as I turned 18, he was the first person to acknowledge me as a man, not a boy anymore. That was great. I'd like to thank a guy I worked with in the 80s, Kevin Holder, just a real president of a company. What the level of quality that he demanded from his people was very high, and it was a great example for me to see at a young age. I'd like to thank a CEO of a consulting firm, Tony Smith. Tony is a freewheeling, brilliant Harvard graduate, lots of pedigree, but there's this integrity and this transparency that he talks about that I learned from him that was very valuable. There's a friend I've known, Derek. Derek is a brilliant, highly intelligent guy with deep expertise in economics. And so the kinds of conversations I've been able to have with him allow me to stretch my thinking, and he actually offers perspectives sometimes that I have to take a step back and recalibrate. My brother, I like to thank him. He's been a very good brother over the years. So I love my brother. Yeah.
Advice you wish you had followed?
If I would have held some of my positions in the stock market instead of selling. Yeah, I did buy. Trust yourself is listen to yourself as opposed to the noise around you.
The best advice you were ever given?
So I was given advice from a former CEO of a Fortune 500, and he talks about hiring your direct reports. And he said, your direct report needs to be able to do 95% of his job without any input from you. It's only that 5% that they should need help and need resources and need to engage you. If they need more than that, then you may have hired the wrong person. If they can only do 85% of their job, they may not be the right person.
Let's take a snapshot of the last 30 days. What was your biggest win?
I would say a client that has an opportunity, and normally they would procrastinate on this opportunity. And I had to almost stand on my head to say, hey, not this time, you're going to win. And the needle is moving on this one. It's just a huge opportunity.
Congratulations. And how do you celebrate wins?
That's a good question. How do I celebrate wins? I guess I've been more of a what you call an introspective person. I look at what was done well and what I learned from it and what could be replicated. That's the way I celebrate.
Yeah, talk about mental wellness and entrepreneurship.
that's critical. Even when I was talking about divorce is one of those things that disrupts mental wellness. So mindset is critical. So one of the things that I do when I'm working with people is to help them uncover blind spots, limiting beliefs, mental barriers, and those things can really impede your mental wellness. And normally it's people are making up stories in their head about what's happening. So oftentimes when people are worried, they're worried about something that is not going to happen. It never happened, and it's not happening now. But yet people have no way of managing the minds in their mind. It's almost like as human beings, we have minefields in our mind, and we have no way of distinguishing the minefields. Therefore, we can never dismantle them. So a huge part of developing a powerful mindset is having distinctions for those minds, those triggers, and being able to unlearn them so that when something happens that normally would trigger you, you're now not triggered. You can actually deal with it for what it is, and you have a much better chance of resolving it in a more objective way, as opposed to trying to suppress your triggers or work through your triggers.
What, if anything, keeps you up at night?
The times that I've been kept up at night is when I've been doing CEO roundtables, and the next day, that night I go to bed, I'm thinking about how I want it to be, and it's sometimes my brain is just working so much that I don't even go to sleep, and it's a disaster. I don't want to say a disaster, but I usually don't get enough sleep because my brain is just going and going. All right, I want this to happen and that, and this, and even though everything is already in place, but it's just what I want, the value I want people to get out of it. My brain is just really works.
And speaking of value, what is the value you want people to take from this interview?
I guess what I said before, that people have what's possible for human beings is much more than they realize. It's more than what our education system has given us. We're more valuable than the knowledge we have. In fact, we as human beings are the ones who are capable of inventing and creating knowledge for people in the future to learn. I mean, if we go back 200 years, there are just things that they didn't know that we know now, and that's all because someone invented and created that knowledge. So I would want people to get that. Steve Jobs is quoted as saying that everything around us was created from nothing, and it was created by people no smarter than you. And that's what people really I'd like them to get. And there's one other thing that may sound counterintuitive, which is there's nothing wrong with anyone. I know we like to say everyone has issues, everyone has something's wrong with you. But if people could really get that, like the universe, and the universe goes through its cycles and motions and meteors going through it, it's perfect. The universe is perfect. The day you were born, for many of you, your mother said, my baby is perfect. And you never lost that. Just because the day you were born, you couldn't tie your shoes didn't mean there was something wrong with you. We're all perfect. We just have the capacity to continue developing no matter how long we live. And if people could live a life from the place of, I'm already perfect and I'm constantly developing, you're less likely to want to make someone feel less than you feel about yourself to level the playing field. We would all be engaged in conversations to learn and develop from one another instead.
Ted, fill in the blank. I am better because
I'm Ted Santos.
I love that. The word is play. How did you or how will you play today?
I do like to play sometimes. How do I play? So I can play with, sometimes I play with puzzles, sometimes not a physical puzzle, but mind puzzles stimulate me. Physically, I like to play. My brother and I grew up wrestling with our father all the time. So we grew up being very physical, and my brother and I used to wrestle ourselves at So there's a level of physicality and danger to my play that makes it enjoyable. I like going to the edge sometimes. So I like to play.
And Santos, if you conducted this interview, what is the one question you would have asked yourself? I want you to ask the question and answer it.
What is corporate America missing? So what corporate America is missing is we are not getting the most out of human capital. Human beings have a much greater capacity than we're giving them credit for. On the balance sheet, we look at a human being as an expense. I'm asserting that the human being can be an asset. Now, many companies say, yes, my people are an asset. And I've had this conversation with former CEOs of Fortune 500. The problem that I see in corporate America from the top leaders is that they usually have two gears to run a company. In good times, hire people. In bad times, fire people. That's it. No one has looked under a rock for a third or fourth possibility beyond those two gears. And so that's all we have. And when we hire people, everyone's happy. When we fire people, GM lays off 10,000 people, which now that's less people to buy homes. So the home builders have to lay off people. And that means the washer and dryer people lay off, the lumber people lay off. And now GM has to lay off because there are less people buying their cars. So they lay off another 20,000. So we're in this, that puts us in this downward spiral, a race to the bottom. And we haven't figured out any other way around it. Now, this pandemic may have actually shown us this new possibility. The Federal Reserve is raising interest rates, and that's an intent to force a recession, which means companies are going to lay people off. However, companies are not laying, they're afraid to lay people off. They may be laying some off, but they're timid about it because the pandemic caused people to not work. They didn't feel like they had to work. We had all this free money. So what companies are doing is they're not laying people off, and the Fed keeps pushing interest rates up. And somehow the economy hasn't spiraled into an inflation that's out of control. We're seeing that you could actually keep people, raise interest rates, and things don't fall out of control. So if you were to look at your people as an asset instead of a liability, right, then what has to happen in an organization where your people are so valuable that laying them off costs more than it does to keep them? And that's what we're seeing now. Companies, it's going to cost too much to lay people off because it's going to take too long to be able to fill those positions. And so we're seeing this in a forced environment. But what I'm saying is that if we had been running companies this way the whole time, we would have had a very different economy. One way to turn your people into assets is, let's say, a division in your company is becoming obsolete because of technology or some other reason. It's not as profitable, so you want to, divest it. How do you train your people in such a way that they are able to create new opportunities, new divisions? Let's say you're a company that makes paper and you have all this machinery and you make paper for the newspaper, physical newspaper. Well, technology may be significantly reducing the amount of physical newspapers people buy. So could you refit those machines to make, let's say, toilet paper? Because as the global population increases, people need more toilet paper. So that's a way to look at your business instead of just shutting it down and laying off 5,000 people. What are the other possibilities? What are the things that we may be able to do for existing clients and retain our people, or find completely untapped markets, or maybe create some disruptive technology? We are too fast to lay people off, which hurts everyone when we start the layoffs. But the pandemic is showing us this possibility beyond what we've always done, but it's forced. And this is, when we were talking before, this is an unfortunate circumstance, which is the pandemic, which may be teaching us something that's in our best interest, and that it's come out of an unfortunate circumstance.
We've come to the part of our interview. It's called Fun Facts Lightning Round. I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and I'd like you to give me very quick answers. If there's something you desire not to answer, feel free to say pass. Are you ready for the Fun Fact Lightning Round?
Let's do it.
What is your favorite comfort food?
I'm a vegetarian, and I gave up junk food in 2007. So I would say blueberries.
The last movie you saw?
Oppenheimer.
You relax doing what?
Working out is very relaxing for me.
Your favorite singer or rapper?
Don't have one.
Your favorite dance song?
Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, Don't Leave Me This Way.
What food you eat every week, no matter what?
Lentils.
Work out or hit the couch?
Work out.
Ted Santos, thank you so much for joining us on Black Entrepreneur Experience Podcast. Before we let you go, share with our audience the best way for them to connect with you and to do business with you, and feel free to leave all your social media handles.
Okay. So I can be found everywhere on social media, like LinkedIn under Ted Santos, Facebook under my name. You may have to look Ted Santos in New Jersey. I'm on Twitter as the Board of Veteran CEOs, and my email address is T like Ted Santos, SANTOS at turnaroundip.com. And IP is like intellectual property. And I'd love to have a conversation with you about your breakthrough, what a breakthrough would be for you.
Thank you, Ted. That's a wrap.
Thank you for listening and subscribing to Black Entrepreneur Experience. We would love for you to leave a review and rating on iTunes and share with your friends. For show notes and more episodes, go to www.beepodcast.com. Join us next Wednesday, and remember, green is the new black. So keep your bank accounts and your business in the black.